dump 2 or 3 cards from your hand, reduce the impact of that glide. But in a lot of situations, like you see this one with Insane, like, how do you play around glide with this hand? He did a pretty good job of it exactly on that turn, but basically everything remaining in his hand is just going to fill his hand up even further from this point.
It's very difficult as well, because on one hand you could be like, oh, well, you could just dump Mana Biscuit. 0 mana, you can get rid of it, you can even use that mana that turn. But cards like Mana Biscuit are one of the cards in the deck that is integral to actually making Mozaki do silly things, right? Because it is a 0 mana spell that then buffs the spell damage and, of course, gains you that extra mana. So really, really difficult to do here. Of course, there's already a Kurtrus in hand on one side of the board as well, some reduced combo pieces, so we might be looking at a bit of a Bly's game.
Yeah, it's not quite a Bly's game. Like, Bly's would have just lethaled them this time. He doesn't have to worry about minor things like Kurtrus. He'd just have discounted Il'gynoth, double discounted Moarg from like a Sigil draw that also got the quest discount. Like, you'd just be dead this turn if this was Bly's on the other side, make no mistake about it. But here you do see Multicaster coming down, and there is kind of one of those hands where the ability to dump is available, but he's going to shut it down. And I think, yeah, well, here's the thing, right? This is a smart turn to not play around glide, because you have a pretty good idea your opponent's not pressing glide this turn, because they would also be gliding away their own quest reward and a full 10-card hand on this turn.
I'd commit. But yeah, no real surprise that we are seeing Kurtrus there. It does mean, though, that there is only going to be one cheap card away, right? Or in the way, should I say, from that glide. So again, keep a close eye on what Insane decides to do here, because it still looks like it's going to be card draw. Brain Freeze gets used up without the damage, because again, Insane just wants to free up hand space, get it done. This Flurry seems very dumpable to me as well this turn. But no Mozaki yet.
Yeah, I know, and that was the thing, right? Like, he managed to dump a card, play Arcane Intellect for 1 mana on that turn. If he'd have hit Mozaki there exactly, like top 15 somewhere, or even off of that Arcane Intellect, with the hand he has, everything costing 0, and a Mana Biscuit, and a Cram Session, and still another 0 mana Ignite yet to draw from the deck, he might have just even been able to get there without Mozaki starting in the hand at the beginning of the turn even, but unfortunately...
Or at least done 80 fatigue damage to himself.
That is true. That is always a valid second prize. That is, at the very least, bronze medalist meme on the podium. Like, okay, you might have won, but I dealt 80 damage to myself, so who's the real winner here?
Yeah. You might have won, but is my play in a show reel clip? You know, it's like, how about that? Who's the real?
Are the casters still talking about you winning the game 6 rounds later? No, absolutely not. Who's the real champion here?
Okay, big questions here. The opportunity to glide is there. It would cost him a Fell Scream. But do you... It's so tricky, because however much glide looks bad for Insane, it's also weirdly bad for Jagdvice, right? Because he had so many good pieces of the combo already in his hand. He only really needs Il'gynoth, but he is going to do it and say, you know what? All of this gets reduced anyway. He's going to draw enough to get it cooking. Spectral Sight on the far left is perfect.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with this as well. Like, even the Talented Arcanist being used there is not even necessarily so much about the clearing power and the healing. It's more so just about really consolidating those draws that he can get back from the glide after the fact, which is a really, really big deal in this position. Immediately getting Spectral Sight back in the clutch position far left is huge in that spot as well. But the big issue this turn is just the sheer level of disruption that he gave over to his opponent. 8-card hand, I think, on the other side, shrunk down to basically an ineffectual mess of nothing on this turn. No Mozaki in the original hand, no Mozaki in this hand either is the headline. But outside of that, Insane is going to have to find a way to go digging here, and right now he's struggling to do so. Fire Sale hits Fire Sale, just keep on cycling, but he's going to need some way to dig harder than that, and that is not it. Probably just has to Runed Orb now in this position to go digging for some card draw.
Yeah, I think he needed exactly Mozaki this turn, right? Because certainly with, like, you know, the Hot Streak, X other card, to then draw into more with the Cram Session, so on, but it doesn't look like it's lining up too well. Shooting Star, not a bad cheap option to just kill off this Kurtrus, but maybe he just feels like he needs something else. He could Arcane Overflow here, which actually on the Kurtrus would not be a terrible backup plan considering Mozaki looks like it's not going to be coming out to play anytime soon.
Yeah, I like the overflow quite a lot, right? He likes, he needs a plan B in this position from my perspective, and so getting a big minion in play at the very least, because right now he's in a spot where even if he hits Mozaki, he's not necessarily guaranteed to be able to have a huge pop-off 30 damage lethal, because, you know, remember, a bunch of cards that cost 0 from his original hand have now been shuffled back into the deck to full cost again without the flow, so even off that cram session, if he gets it juiced up to draw 3, 4, 5, 6 cards off the Mozaki, it's not necessarily drawing 0 mana spells from that point onwards. So a little surprised to not see him go for the big board presence in that spot, just in choosing to dunk the damage instead, which I suppose does play to a little bit of the same out in that spot, right? Front loading a little bit of extra damage, but he has just absolutely bricked in that spot. Nothing doing in this hand whatsoever.
It's really rough, isn't it? But weirdly enough, both players kind of did the same, right? Like, yes, Jack Vice did get his sigil so he can draw 2 next turn, which is, of course, a big deal. Already has the Il'gynoth, some I-beams, the blast. But he basically skipped that whole turn as well, so both players not really getting hold of what they need. But I do think the fact that Jack Vice just has more card draw naturally in his deck, such as acrobatics that you're going to see right there, means that even if both players are struggling, Demon Hunter's still going to get the better end of the stick, right? On average.
Double jump is played. Persistent Peddler will likely get on the board here. 2 more draws from the acrobatics aura. Rustrock Viper is a whiff. He's looking for the Moargs to go alongside all of this, and now he's found it with 3 I-beams here as well. Can only currently fit in 2 of them alongside the Guild Trader and the Moarg, but he can then squeeze in a Fellscream Blast alongside that as well.
Yeah, I was actually just for a second quickly looking at just what the Il'gynoth Guild Trader Moarg Fellscream is. He's only on 25, right? It's not like there's a huge amount of damage needed, but I do think it falls short, right?
Yep, he either has to go just Il'gynoth and Moarg and then a bunch of I-beams and a Fellscream, or just Il'gynoth, the Guild Trader, the Moarg and the Fellscream Blast, which is a little bit short either way around, I do believe.
I like this I-beam use though, just get it played, because he won't need 3 I-beams and a Fellscream Blast to win the game, I imagine, so why not just help out a little bit, right? Just gain a little bit of extra health, maybe because the lack of cards like Insane, with also having played 1 cram session last turn, you know, maybe even a Mozaki might not be enough on its own with a few cards to go for it, so why not gain 3 extra health? Oh, the cram session finally got played there from Insane.
These cards are just all coming in the wrong order. Both cram sessions cast, then the primordial studies after the fact. Picks up Stuart to try and find some value, but then just finds primordial studies again. We're having already used the cram sessions. No way to cycle this into more card draw, and I think that is a well-assessed look of resignation on Insane's face right now, as he is probably going to bite the dust.
Weirdly enough, and this is me just picking up small things, but I think I would have picked Solana and tried to just play it and get it killed, to just try and say, you know what, it's a prime kind of game. But yeah, the draw here from Jack Vice means that this is going to be over this turn, as there's I-beams aplenty, Fellscream Blast as well. Whatever he wants, he's going to clean this one up. And you were right when we were talking about the matchup. The Glide just broke the game in a weird way, kind of for both players. But I think in that situation, Demon Hunter on average just has better singular card draws to recover from having no cards than Mage does. We saw that cram session sticking Insane's hand for what, 5, 6 turns, maybe more at that point, and you know, it just wasn't looking good. Rough one there.
Yeah, particularly if you look back to the early stages of this game, right? Like, we have talked a lot through various matchups about the correct and incorrect ways to kind of navigate through Glide on the other side if you're playing that kind of matchup against Demon Hunter. This is not a criticism of the way Insane played the game, because I think, you know, turboing out and trying to find that Mozaki top half, you can see the way he played it. If he had top half Mozaki, he probably would have won the game before that Glide even came down for disruption. But the way he played it, he'd played 2 multi multicasters, he'd played a Spring Water, he'd played an Arcane Intellect, so his deck was anti-stacked with card draw in terms of, you know, the blackjack count. He was low on 10s in the deck, so that meant that after the glide happened, having already used a bunch of that card draw, he was disrupted to the maximum degree, whereas we've seen in a lot of other matchups, players will very deliberately just not play the card Shroud of Concealment, not play the card Swindle, and instead just throw some other minions out on board. So that means when you do get hit with the glide, almost inevitably in that matchup against Demon Hunter, your deck is then stacked and you are much more likely to then draw Swindle, draw Shroud, draw Field Contact off the top and start powering through. But just the way that hand panned out, I think hitting double flow and a bunch of card draw, Insane was probably within his rights to just say, all right, turbo, let's go. If it's in the top half, we probably get there.
They don't move into the next game. Jackvice is going to be on Face Hunter, and strangely enough, old school Face Hunter at this point, I'm going to call it, with the Felmors. There wasn't a biscuit in sight, as far as I could see, Sottle, which does disappoint me just a little bit, as I really like the card. But still, I do wonder how this is. I mean, well, it must be holding up reasonably well. He's 5-1 in the Swiss, right? So it can't be too bad. But yeah, interesting choice not to kind of go with the flow and bring the more buff sort of aligned Hunter right now.
That's just a one-sided biscuit battle. There is a mana biscuit on the other side, but no biscuit to counteract it.
As well, and it's one of those weird, right? And just expect it to live a turn. Like I said, in some hours, so we'll see if that so far. But with the Felmor and Mankey out on curve, looking like as strong an opening as Jackvice could realistically want. Even got a okay follow-up for turn 4. If it's not going to be Wrangler, then why not an Intrepid Initiate plus the Adorable?
Ich frage mich,
already. This deck is not particularly good at putting small, annoying
Dämonensaat gewinnt an Macht.
where that point is leading, whether or not Insane would feel pressured into getting that multicaster down on board just for 2 draws in this spot and hoping it can soak that damage. But based on the reaction, spoiler, we saw it before we actually saw it in the game. That is 5 free damage essentially going to the face in that position.
Das gibt nicht mal für ein Anhieb. Eure Gegenwart ist eine Beleidigung.
Ihr habt Feuer im Herzen.
Eure Gegenwart ist eine Beleidigung.
It's a little bit disappointing there, but yeah, you are right. So much damage already, and although this is not Quest Mage, it functions in very similar ways, doesn't it? And if you can push this much damage by turn 4 for Hunter, you are getting close to just saying, you know what? Hero powers and my damage spells off the top will be easily enough to get this done.
Maybe if the Felmor attacks hard enough, it can eat the mana biscuit out of Insane's hand instead. I don't know if it's quite reached that level of trick. Like, that's like expert level. You know, when you can, like, balance a treat on the dog's nose and they don't hit until eat it. Good boy. That's that level of Felmor. You've got it.
Ihn erwartet ewige Finsternis.
Just a dog expansion. And it revolves around, what, are you playing the dog deck or the biscuit deck? It's like, that's a strict counter. Well, that's
Do dogs counter biscuits or do biscuits counter dogs? I'm not sure what the dynamic is.
yeah, maybe there's certain types. Because on one end, you've got a dog could eat a biscuit, and that's normally a strong counter to things, getting rid of them by eating them. But also you can control dogs with food. Like food. So the one that like
Caster, Protector, Fighter. No,
yeah. Wait a minute, I've got a great idea for a game
Welch
mode.
wundersame Macht.
Dog biscuit food.
Ihr habt Feuer im Herzen.
Gut gemacht.
Going in for Jack. In a matchup like this, you can't really expect to line those well. What else is he going to do? No flurry, no other freeze effects, no other removal actually more along this hand. This is just
no fire sale, nothing that can really interact favorably with this board state. So Insane is going to have to give up one of his prized possessions here, which is that Mana Biscuit. That's kind of his scam potential right now to try and win the game, especially with an Incanter's Flow just cast. But he needs to go digging, and it looks like he is going to bet this on hitting a flurry at the very least off the top here to give him the chances that he needs. But if he does not hit flurry, his goose is most likely cooked in this scenario, and that is no flurry for Insane. That is just now far too much damage represented on the other side of the board. This one is looking over, and yes, Insane agrees.
Yeah, and I can't even argue, right? I'm normally one who's like, oh, but what if you get this out? But there, no chance. So much just minion damage. Never mind any of the cards that were in the Hunter's hands at all. So much damage was put forward there. And, you know, back-to-back games there where Insane struggled on Mage. And I'm not saying he struggled to play the deck, but the deck was not being very nice to him at that point. So, really good win there, though, for Jackvice. It does mean he will be going up into a 6-1 spot in Swift, so very, very strong. But again, we do seem to always be featuring Insane in Masters Tours, and I don't think that's going to change anytime soon anyway. Still having great results overall, but yeah, just a bit of a brutal couple of games there we got to cover, honestly, so.
Yeah, Insane is one of those players that I do feel a little bit bad for. Like, he's a real journeyman of the scene. 12 Masters Tours, I think, now under his belt. Pushing 60% win rate. Very, very strong player. Has been around the scene even back in the old days of seasonal qualifiers, seasonal championships. He was around in that scene as well. He was a player that we would feature quite heavily with a lot of prominence in those spots as well. Just one of those players that just hasn't been able to put those wins together at the right times to really break through and have those massive performances. And sometimes it does feel like that is just the way, because we dipped into that series and it really did not feel like there was too much he could have been doing to change the flow of those matchups.
Yeah, it was definitely a tough one overall, and that also means we are round number 7 now is done, and we've got
breakpoints, but a lot of its matchups, it's still very doable to get the OTKs with 3 spell damage. And he did actually win a show match versus Jay Alexander, the two of them, the two supposed best Garrote players in the world, and Fury Hunter asserted his dominance, winning over their, what was it, best of 7 or best of 11, something like that. But he is going to queue up the OTK Demon Hunter first. Only one card from the mini set featured in here with the need for greed. And I wonder how this is going to pan out versus Libram Paladin, because I used to think OTK Demon Hunter should struggle against big, tall minions with Divine Shield, but somehow the Paladin has felt slower and slower. But maybe this build from Jombre, which has cut the variant from the top end to have a bit more consistency in the mid-game with the Blessings of Authority, can get the job done.
Yeah, that's right. Paladin has been one of those decks that for the longest time, on paper, has looked fantastic, but when it actually gets into things, just hasn't really been able to get things done. But of course, Paladin is the deck that's gotten new tools recently. Demon Hunter, not quite so much. Need for Greed is a card that I feel like players put in their list as a one-of almost always, very rarely a two-of. And it obviously doesn't make the deck worse, or they wouldn't put it in, but it's not really bolstering any win rates drastically, I don't feel, because even post-Kurtrus, it can only ever cost 3 at its cheapest value, which does make it a little less effective in terms of super efficient card draw than you may otherwise like. But still, as you say, the Paladin often feels like it struggles to get those big minions that the Demon Hunter can't answer online quite quickly enough. And especially when you're facing a hand like this one for Fury Hunter, which, while no absolute standout game-winning hand right from the start, has got a couple tradables leading into a glide on turn 4 as well. It's doing stuff and it's moving towards the win condition with some pace.
And for Jombre, the hand is starting to come together as well. He did have a couple slow turns at the beginning, which Fury Hunter could answer just with the hero power, but after this Bannerman has entered the mix, now there's a clean 4-5 curve for Jombre, except the glide has also come into play here, getting rid of the Aldor Truthseeker and the Cariel, which Jombre was kind of relying on to get any significant pressure on board. But maybe if he can get a Blessing of Authority back from this, he doesn't. He did end up with Cariol though, and the Righteous Defense, which was a 1-of in the original hand. So at least there's still some curve options, but I'm really looking for, yes, one of those big buff cards to make this come together for Jambray.
Now we're talking. This is where a lot of the different versions of Paladin feel like they meet at a point here with this Blessing of Authority, because the aggressive decks are all running it, and now I'm seeing more and more of the Libram versions also putting in this Blessing of Authority, because with the Parrot in there as well, it's just such a devastating combo to give it another +8/+8. Demon Hunter simply cannot kill that. And so as I see it for Fury Hunter here, with him having drawn a disastrous backup hand off the Glide, he needs to start drawing into some real powerhouse draw options off of this Tusk Piercer.
That's right. He's going to overwrite the first one and then trade the Peddler to hopefully come up with a Spectral Sight or something like that. But it's not any further card draw. It is just a combo piece, and it is technically a way to clear the 4/4, but not also the 1/1 that I can see, unless he wants to spend the Fell Scream as well, which is terrible. I think this is just going to end up being a swing pass for Fury Hunter.
Swing face or kill Divine Shield?
Probably get rid of the Divine Shield, but man, is it painful. It's starting to stack up. I mean, Jambray also, I thought he was going to go for a Cariol potentially. It would end up with still a Divine Shield minion on the board, but I think he was trying to make the stickiest board possible, which is to layer a Divine Shield under a Divine Shield, which is what Noble Mount that turn accomplishes. Because say he had played Cariol and Fury Hunter had just gone for like swing and buffed Fell Scream Blast or even a buffed Immolation Aura. The entire board is gone and Jambray doesn't get to Blessing on curve. And the entire game plan is about this Blessing on curve.
Yeah, this is the one thing that Fury really did not want to see. Everything else, if it was a wide board in any way, he could deal with it. But this tall minion, doubling up on Arcanist, Moarg, and Immolation Aura is not as effective as you might hope, as obviously the Moarg dies after the first activation of the Immolation Aura, and then does not deal the full 12 damage that you would like it to do, only going up to 9 in the absolute best case. And so here, Fury Hunter again, he's got to trade, he's got to hope for... again, Spectral Sight, maybe a runner off of this Illidari studies, because his only game plan here is somehow spiking a monumental clear whilst also keeping momentum in terms of his quest.
Yeah, there's just simply no easy way to answer this 12/12 ever since the Silence card from Demon Hunter was moved into Wild. Moarg I-Beam can start to get there, but it's next turn, right, Ark? He has to tank the 12 this turn, plus what other buff cards that Jambray has. In fact, there could just be lethal with double Hand of a Doll or something like that.
Another happy guildie.
And so we could have seen... I guess holding on to the Guild Trader is just too expensive and you do need to get the draw. I'm trying to think about how we can juice up this I-Beam to be anywhere close enough to get the kill here. Like, if he gets exactly another Moarg Artificer, you could go Immo, Arcanist, Moarg, I-Beam. I don't even think you have enough mana at that point to be able to get there. But that's the kind of combo that we're going to need to kill off this absolutely bananas Banana Man.
And I think because of that reason, the mana, that's why Fury Hunter didn't actually play the Sigil this turn. He's hoping to top deck perhaps specifically Moarg, so he can play those and then play the zero-cost Sigil to keep the I-Beam in outcast position. Okay. But it needs to happen this turn. Math. I think a clear is possible here.
Feels like it should be, doesn't it?
But it probably completely wrecks the combo. So I'm looking at Immo, and then like Moarg, Talented Arcanist, Fell Scream, and then you can play the Sigil and still have mana to play the I-Beam for 6. I think that works. It doesn't clear the horse at the bottom, but I guess you can swing out the Divine Shield.
This does it perfectly. 10. I was looking if you could do it from the left-hand side, which I think was still possible, but would obviously involve using the Fell Scream Blast to get the I-Beam cheap enough, whereas this just keeps it... well, is able to kill the horse as well. Just a nice optimization by Fury Hunter.
Yeah, even better than what I spotted. Of course, you can expect that from the winner of the previous Masters Tour, and yeah, so calculated that, honestly. But for Jambray here, he's got the Parrot now. I don't think it gives... Does it give him Blessing of Authority? Was that the last friendly spell played?
It does, right? I think that was the last one that was played a couple of times.
Ooh, yeah, it was after the Noble Mount, and it's friendly spells, right? So it doesn't actually take
Rexar
the
gegen
righteous defense because it was
Hamul!
played on an enemy minion here.
Natur strebt nach Gleichgewicht in allen Dingen.
Lass die Jagd beginnen.
Again, the problem is with Moog and Immolation Auras, you can play the other one, you can double up on these effects, but they just die after the first activation, which means here for Fury Hunter, it looks like he might be having to go for somehow sneaking a win next turn. I don't really know how, because if he doesn't, this parrot is just too big and it's going to kill him in 2 turns' time.
Absolutely will. I think he's also used too many healing pieces at this point that he can like try to survive a turn and then go for Il'gynoth. It's got to be some type of board-based game plan, but even then, I'm not sure how to survive the power.
Grüße.
Slow for Jumper here. It's just a this turn. Just send the Parrot face, and he should know that too many combo pieces have been used already for Fury Hunter.
Did there used to be a silence card that you could discover off the Illidari study?
There used to be, yeah.
Yeah.
Now you can draw a card as well.
Right, yeah. That would be
All the
great,
way in
right?
Wild now.
Exactly, yeah. Unfortunately not available. And with there being no other silence cards available off of the Illidari study, hard kill a minion. This is one of the things I think Jambray has really cleverly targeted about this meta. I think I was talking to you a little bit about it during rehearsal the other day, is just lack of hard removal. And all of Jambray's decks, I think, really cleverly take advantage of this. Look at this big minion with the Blessing of Authority. This is going to happen in most of his games with the Paladin, the way he's got it built. And the Demon Hunter, Warlock, Rogue, Warrior can't deal with that. Same with the Priest, where you're buffing up huge minions. Same with the Druid, where you have all these huge buff effects. It's a very clever analysis of the metagame and realization of its weak points.
And this is with Jambray essentially passing the last turn. He just buffed the Pirate for +1/+1. Still just Giga winning. You know, Fury Hunter, if this Arcanist were a guild trader, he'd actually have lethal this turn, but alas, the spell damage is gone from that ability. So he's just digging for I don't know what. I truly think Chaos Leech can that be?
Bei Fußmädchen, ich bin eine Falle.
Yeah, no mana.
Can that heal out of range?
Nope.
Nope.
Not at all. Jambray takes the win despite, you know, getting glided, losing the curve. It was just all in on making sure you could have a Blessing of Authority target. Then, if by some miracle, it had to be a lot of a specific combination of cards for Jambray to even clear that first one, it does get removed. He had the Sunwing Squawker, and that one was just impossible for Fury Hunter to interact with. I'm glad that you brought up the big minion techs from Jambray, because he's also kind of got counterplay for his own strategy built into his decks, right? He's got the righteous defense in the Paladin. That's something that
Unglaublich.
Ich sehe eure Schwäche.
Every single meta Gia where I shouldn't believe Jambray's lies. I shouldn't believe everything he's peddling on us with these decks, because when I lay it out, I can always convince myself that they make sense. Sometimes I actually have a lot of success on ladder.
Ich bringe Leben und Hoffnung.
Erstaunlich.
Not trying to dump it into is genuinely undeniably like top 3 deck builds I think we've ever seen in Hearthstone. But the performances just haven't really been being put up with these decks, these very wacky deck lists that he's bringing. He's had a lot of 1-3, 2-3 runs at Masters Tours, with Bucharest a couple years ago now being the last really impressive run he had.
Euren unglaublichen Schwindel bringe euch zur Strecke.
A lot of fun. But yeah, like I was saying, it just hasn't been putting up those performances, and so I wonder if this time maybe he's cracked it, or maybe I'm just falling for the same old traps once again.
calling him a persistent.
I am indeed.
Grüße.
Really believing they are the most powerful decks. I respect him for just doing his own thing. How many people can say that they build their own confidence to
Ich werde euren Körper
Players that don't really know what they're up against. He does it against me versus ladder every single time. I don't know what I'm playing around, but perhaps Fury Hunter will have more knowledge than the average player because they are both in the Mr. Tourney Ufen group together. And Fury Hunter in round 1 from Izzot didn't quite come together, but I believe this is not just a meme deck. I think it's very powerful, and I think it might even be
I was playing this a little bit in practice testing, and I mean, if I'm winning a deck, then you know you have to pay attention to it because there's something going on there. And I fully agree. I think that it's got the same kind of package of the early game for Quest Mage. Because, again, we talked about being weak to face almost always going to be able to clear off any board that the opponent goes for. It's just the burn damage that they're weak to, and this deck also has a very strong early game it's just the mid game where I think it pops off a little bit more quickly, and that comes at the hands of Mozaki, which is kept in the starting hand by Fury Hunter.
Absolutely. I keep Mozaki almost every matchup, but especially versus this Priest. I mean, these decks have something in common. They're running very few minions and a whole ton of spells. I'll tell you what though, the spells for Jambray tend to make his minions very large. It does of course involve Fury Hunter getting at some point. Jambray is trying to double down on the fact that Fury Hunter maybe needs a little bit more time to get the
Zeit rennt davon.
even thinking about just dropping them right now.
Erstaunlich.
I've got to be honest, in one of the few messages he sent to me where I was probing him about any tips to do with this Priest deck, he was saying, generally, you wait to go all in before you go in here. And even just coining out this Nazmani is pretty all in. If this dies, his hand is doing absolutely nothing. But I guess making the read that with a double keep from Fury Hunter, it's incredibly unlikely that there will be the answer to be able to clear it off. Unfortunately for him, though, it's the, what is this, first flame, second flame, with a hot streak of all cards in the middle to buy the perfect mana for the ping, which sets Jambray back so far. This was a huge gamble that did not pay off.
Complete respect from Fury Hunter, and I think it is absolutely the right play because this particular version of Miracle Priest from Jambray, like you said, is not running Sethek and also not running Raised Dead because of that. There's no rally as well to try and get those key minions of Nazmani Bloodweaver to come back every single time. Relying on having them stick, maybe trying to prey on decks that don't get on board quite so early, but the removal was there for Fury Hunter, and now Jambray back to the only one Nazmani left in the deck.
Yeah, holding off for a turn because he would never be able to play, or he was never going to play the Nazmani next turn anyway, I don't think, because now he's waiting for that power word, Fortitude to
Erstaunlich ist
but
voll.
now that you see, as you said, no copy of readings, he's just going to play it and hope to make a really big Nazmani Bloodweaver and say, this is going to win me the game.
Ambitious.
Erstaunlich.
For Fury Hunter, there is not that much card draw. This first gets very expensive. Is it ever stupid?
What happens if you just go mini-mage? Because I was going to say, if you play mini-mage proactively, it gives you the ability to clear off one of their early game minions, I suppose. In the mid-game. But I wonder if that's just kind of naive thinking, and that if they play a Nazmani, it's going to have so much health that you're never going to be able to clear it off anyway. He does just go for it anyway, because I think it was probably the best option. So Stuart is a little slow.
It is a big deal spoil now because he had that mana spent and out of the way, and there's actually no Condemn or AoE in the list from Jambray, so the mini mage can just stick around for that additional damage. That's one way to revert the nerf on Quest Mage, I suppose. But the big deal
Euer Wunsch sei mir Anregung.
Fire and Arcane, and so he took the turn to go.
Hab Vertrauen in das
I think that is a wise move. You want to get maximum healing if possible, and Jambray is setting up for his own Nazmani, but that is second flow played for Fury Hunter. This is the perfect setup for Mozaki.
Euer Wunsch sei mir Anregung.
Actually, I was going to say you do, but you can just go with Mozaki and crash. Double Nazmani and come down.
One flurry, and that's it. Fury Hunter doesn't have to care about that board. He is just going to go for the palm reading first, and none of these are jumping out to me as game-winning options, but Powered Infusion just kind of goes along with the strategy of make a huge Nazmani. It's just not much counterplay against the combo potential from Fury Hunter. So it's a question for Jambray is how long can he actually wait? He hasn't seen any mana biscuits, so I would be in his position thinking maybe I have one more turn, but here it's coming together, Daruk. I think Fury Hunter has it next turn, and without Elusha or anything like that, I don't know if there's anything Jambray can do to stop it.
Yeah, it was maybe possible on this turn for Fury Hunter, but I think there was a little bit of randomness you're leaving it up to, whereas next turn, like you said, even not being able to see the number of cards in deck, this is lethal 100% next turn as long as Fury Hunter does not mess anything up too poorly, as we saw can happen in the previous series, but I have a lot of faith in Fury Hunter with these styles of decks that I think he showed a great aptitude for in his win with some incredible Garrote Rogue play in Masters Tour Stormwind. And so here you say, Jambray probably just dead next turn. I'm trying to think if there's anything he can discover along the way to get him there. He doesn't have Mr. Smite in his deck, which is, I think, the only thing that could save him now to maybe buff it up to 30 attack and go for the kill that way. Because, like you said, he needs a full turn to get ready with all these minions, and he does not have a turn.
Oh, Smite would be sick in this deck, huh? You should. Okay, Jambray's going back in the lab after this. You know it already, but here it is, the big pop-off, discounting tons of cards. Actually, not as many as I thought originally, but the train is still going. It's going to be a big Nazmani that Fury Hunter can very happily just freeze. Not that the freeze is relevant to preventing the damage so much as just buffing the Mozaki, but here we go. Each biscuit buffing for +2 spell damage essentially because of the 2 spells played. There's also just the mini mage on board. I think each ignite can easily do 15 from this position, and as long as Fury Hunter doesn't play a random cram session for too much card draw and lose to fatigue, this is giga uber mega lethal.
Sounds again like the name of the practice group, the Giga Uber Offen he's playing. And like you said, yeah, I absolutely agree. This one, I think, is absolutely in the bag. Really alone is pretty much guaranteed damage with the minions attacking as well. Jambray just kind of hitting a counter. I like that he took a big risk. We saw right at the start of the game, coining out the Nazmani Bloodweaver. Clearly a play you don't usually want to make with this deck, which only runs 2 minions you can buff in the early game in the entirety of the deck. But he took a risk, it didn't pay off, and maybe if it had gone a different way, he would have been able to get there with the early game pressure with one really big Nazmani. So I respect his line, even if it did lose in the game here.
Yeah, it did fizzle towards the end, but obviously you're not looking to run up into Mozaki Mage in the first place with this lineup. I can see this Priest getting there against a lot more board-based matchups like Face Hunters, even Libram Paladin to a certain extent. If you just create one big thing and put Divine Shield on it, just like what Jambray did a while ago, there's not many decks that can do that super cleanly. Garrote Rogue also might struggle level depending on the timing of it because there's no sap effect in that deck. So Jombre still has a lot of game with the Priest. Maybe if Fury Hunter decides to run it back with the Demon Hunter, that could become a good matchup for Jombre. But I'm excited to see if he'll actually stick with it because Jombre's other deck is still very spicy. It's an Evolve Shaman, Derek.
That's right, yeah. People have been messing around with Evolve Shaman for a little while with the 7-mana 6/6 that plays a weapon from your deck that I cannot remember the name of, that kind of slotted in and out at the start. Now, generally, I think seen as being a little bit too slow in this metagame, which I can understand, even though it does have a fair amount of power. But there's just a lot of different things happening in that deck at the same time. There's the Elemental package in the early game. There's the Bolner part of the deck where you're trying to double up on the battle cries. And then, of course, the extra spice that comes with Tiny Toys and Bogspine Knuckles. It's a lot less all-in of an Evolved Shaman compared to some of the ones we've seen before, but is a typically Jambray deck, as Bogspine Knuckles is just one of those cards that is just eternally now a Jambray card.
It truly is, and it creates all these variables that we can never really account for. Of course, the Tiny Toys minions are 5-drops and they evolve into 6, so the power of Bogspine Knuckles is kind of dependent on the power of 6-drops in the current meta, which I cannot honestly give you an average for it at the moment. If the mini set changed anything is also something I'm not completely aware of, but just the pure statage you get from that is a lot to beat a lot of decks, and that is the central theme of Jambray's lineups, right? Big minions that you cannot remove slap you in the face. You don't need fancy combos with spells if the minions can just get there.
Yeah, absolutely. And like we've been seeing, he's relying on the Gambit here, I think, that obviously his decks have a lot of power against aggro because you can just go for stronger board pushes. He's still playing an Elemental package. The Gambit he's taking is whether or not his decks are quick enough to beat combos, sorry. The likes of Demon Hunter, the likes of Mozaki or Spell Mage, and the likes of Garrote Rogue. The Priest quite clearly was not quick enough to beat Mozaki Mage, as we expected, because they have the power of those freezes, so even if he had got a big minion, it wouldn't have been able to get there. Against Demon Hunter, though, I actually have a lot more faith in his Priest deck and his lineup as a whole, because if he can just find himself one of those Sethic Veil Weavers and then wait until turn, I don't know, 4 or 5, maybe 6, before he plays a whole bunch of cards, he can get an awful lot of statage online that Demon Hunter really can't answer.
Right, the Nazmanis. Sorry, I confused them as well. There's no Sethic in this list.
Oh, sorry. Nazmanis, yes, my bad.
Yeah, but I mean, they are the beating heart of the deck, right? It's all about the discounts. Jambray's just saying there's no additional Priest cards I need to win the matchups that I've built the lineup for. It's just the stats. And so going by that line of thinking, then yeah, I guess you don't necessarily need Sethic. You just need the Nazmani to stick around, have an Alec mount, have a Power Word Fortitude, and hit your opponent in the face a couple times. That being said, I guess it means, I would say, look at Apotheosis, because that's another buff card, but he decides to deviate a bit and go for Devouring Plague instead. I guess that helps deal with things like Tempo Moards, if they ever happen.
Yeah, I think it's more just to have a card that's more likely to be playable to corrupt the insight than the Apotheosis is, if I had to guess, because the way this hand is structured, it is actually quite a big difference between a 1-mana and a 3-mana Nazmani to try and maybe cheat out one of these Alec mounts at the same time. But like you say, it's a weird pick, and it implies quite clearly, I think, or shows quite well that they were not good selections off of the Renew.
And as it stands, does Jambray have time to wait to corrupt the insight? Oh, okay, today I learned you can play Devouring Plague with no targets, so alright, makes sense. Slide came at a very awkward timing for Fury Hunter. Can't quite outcast it in the near future, given that it's going to be stuck in the middle next turn. But he might just have the glide played for not outcast next turn to just progress the quest that way. And if you are planning to glide next turn, that would imply pruning the hand this turn of cards you don't necessarily want to draw. Immolation Aura I'm not sure how to evaluate it in the matchup because it could be one of the few ways you can deal with like a non-juiced Nazmani.
Yeah.
But then you have to ask yourself the question: if a Nazmani coming down, isn't Jombre going to buff it immediately, and thus the immo becomes not that great anyway?
Ooh. I was going to say I think you keep it, because with like Talented Arcanist plus Immolation Aura and then Moog plus I-Beam, that's like 12 damage that you can deal to a minion on its own, which is obviously incredibly expensive, but you can be very liberal with your removal in this matchup. You just need to kill a couple of key targets, and you'll be able to happily sail through the mid-game. But Fury disagrees, focusing much more heavily on his own game plan by trying to get that glide in the outcast position. And like I said, I wasn't expecting it, but I respect it in its own right. As Jambray hits the 1 out of 3, or misses the 2 out of 3, depending on how you see it, and it's Malagos in his hand instead of the Nazmani. How are we feeling about that?
That's a definite miss in my book, Dario, because Zan is just doing nothing until turn 7 without a Nazmani. And that means Fury Hunter has all the time in the world to complete the quest. And the question is, how does he want to do it? Like, that Spectral being top deck here allows him the potential to deviate from Glide. The studies can be played and he can still choose either option, but I guess it just ends up being Glide here. Although the Stelina, because he's expecting that to be a Nazmani in hand, you could be saying, let's put that back in the deck. In the end, though, it is just quest progression, which I respect.
Yeah, Fury Hunter's got a very clear game plan here, right? It's, I'm going to kill you before you can kill me. It's the one turn earlier, because until you see the buff effect, you know you're safe. This Priest deck is kind of a combo deck, but it's not a from-hand combo deck. And clearly Fury Hunter, although he definitely can't make the read that there's no Nazmani in hand,
Rexa gegen Garrosh.
Because nothing happens.
Ja, ihr segelt jetzt in meinen Gewässern. Lasst die Jagd beginnen.
This for Fury Hunter, while I think it's probably got to be the Spectral site, man, that Stelina is so tempting.
I mean, there's one in his deck already, so I do much prefer the Spectral as well. He can complete the quest in a lot of worlds even without discovering another Spectral site, but this now potentially allows him to save the
Ahoy, ihr Lastmatrose.
To the lethal sooner. So also, like, Jambray just has more cards in hand now, so it's even less likely that if there were a Nazmani, that Fury Hunter would be able to put it back in the deck using Stelina. But here she comes again, creating one more crossroads for Fury Hunter, but turns it down once again. It's all about the quest completion, and I do respect the consistency of the lines.
Yeah, exactly. He's very clearly setting up for like.
Ich bringe euch zur Strecke.
You draw a lot on 7 and then you kill on turn 8 is usually the game plan with these sorts of quick hands that you get from Demon Hunter.
Schnappt euch die Säbel, jetzt wird gerasselt!
Inside, sorry, down for Jambray is fantastic to be able to get that Nazmani, get these effects played. He still ideally wants to be able to copy it on the same turn, I would say.
Die Stunde findet heute draußen statt.
Grüße.
Just the fact that the Power and Fortitude was 1 mana off was huge there, but in effect, it's still accomplishing something similar, which is I suppose for half a second about playing Kurchus, but he just doesn't care. He knows he's very unlikely to die from 1 minion. Probably even mathematically impossible. I don't know if there's any way for that to get up to 30 attack this turn, but we'll see what Jambray can do.
Yeah, exactly.
Spürt den Wind.
Very difficult to get enough juice to be able to get there. The Psych Split obviously helps with an awful lot of mana cheat, but I think you and I can both see it's not getting there. This is the kind of hand that reaches that terminal where Malagos will cost 0, he can draw the entire deck, and then everything in his deck costs 0. This is just about getting it as high as possible.
Na, ist da jemand hungrig?
Split and Power Word Feast. I would say, that's in a bad enough spot that I'd like to go for the Psyche Split first and nail
Blut
the
und
discount.
Beute.
In der Kiste? Piratenkram.
Ends up with a threatening hole. To be fair, this could end up being lethal next turn, but Fury Hunter, man, doesn't have Fell Scream, so it's not lethal at least.
Okay, skills because you can't replay them to get the extra effect on the acrobatics. But man, this is really close to lethal, and it feels like a
Na, ist da
guaranteed.
jemand hungrig?
So Fury Hunter, it's just about taking any precautions you can that will hopefully mean that you don't die. And for the most part, just praying that Jambray doesn't have some kind of a miracle hand that leaves you dead from thirst.
Well, Fury Hunter does have...
Lasst meine Tiere in Ruhe!
Bei all meinem geflügelten Gold!
The second Nazmani, even though one Nazmani only has been naturally played, the other was copied. But you'd have to assume that if that were a Nazmani from the first Insight, it would have joined the mix on the previous turn. So with that Malagos, is there
Goldene Aussichten!
generate 14 because he's representing right now? I don't know, but it's not there. And then
Das Beute dann bye-bye!
He has to
Schnappt euch die Säbel! Jetzt wird gerasselt!
Obviously, it's really powerful for more reductions, but it's really expensive on this turn. Now he's getting 3 discount every spell he played. Jambray needs to go, 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 go.
He's going, but maybe not 5 goes. It's like 2 goes here. Okay, but then even if and they are not cheap enough, I thought it had to be some type of Malagos turn, but he's clearly just hoping he's not dead on the other side. That's something to say about that. Il'gynoth, Fellscream, Moarg, 18 in hand already. Just needs a bit more spell damage. Has plenty of mana to work with. That is not spell damage though. And no hand space to go for. He can't also go for like the Il'gynoth
Schätze,
into
Beute?
Blight.
Was will man mehr?
So he's trading the need for it's close there, Dara.
That was
Schneller, ihr
unbelievable.
rottigen Süßwassermatrosen!
Gut gekämpft. Ich ergebe
That
mich.
came down to like Jambray almost did it. I believe so almost got there and handled it like an absolute champ. Again, the timing of his Nazmani Bloodweaver was absolutely spot on to try and deny that Kurtrus. Wasn't good enough, and the game plan from Jambray, what I was saying, the question mark in his lineup, can his decks go quick enough to beat combos? At the moment, that's looking a little bit questionable. Again, he's had some bad beats with his Nazmani dying on 3 versus the Mage was quite a specific hand that needed to happen. And again, missing the Sethic in this game and instead drawing a pretty useless Malagos. It's unlucky, but that's kind of baked into the game plan. You're always going to be doing a 1 in 3 with these insights in his deck. And so far, the combo decks seem to just be running over him.
So far, but there is one more that Jambray can hope to sweep with his last 2 decks, and that is the Quest Lock from Fury Hunter. I've defaulted to just calling it Quest Warlock because it's not quite the same Delete Warlock we were seeing like originally from Give Please and Apex.
Rexha gegen den Donnerkönig!
Soul Rends and tried to win.
Ich bin der Bezwinger von Königen und Göttern!
This is still a Tamsin Quester.
Lass die Jagd beginnen.
But you're not running that much of self-deck destruction. You're just running tons of card draw and tons of anti-aggro tools. So much healing in this deck. It's insane. You can go from 3 HP all the way back up to 30 if you have the right tools. And you have the double Hand of Gul'dan in this version as well, which can be paired with Tamsin Roam to copy and get you even further through fatigue after you've played the Quest Reward Tamsin and kill your opponent that way. This is a deck though that I feel could potentially struggle with tall minions as well. There is Moarg in there with the Unstable Shadow Blast, but it's only 1 copy, right? And a lot of the other removal is better built to deal with small and wide boards.
That's right, yeah. The Grimmery of Sacrifice is a card that can deal with aggro matchups very effectively, but the slower matchups not quite so well. As just I don't know, an 8-10 health Nazmani Bloodweaver. It's a pretty specific hand that you need, and it usually revolves around Tamsin if you're going to be able to clean that up. So excited to see this one. Again, looking for for any of those card draw effects, any of those buff effects. A palm reading certainly does not hurt with the Nazmani already in hand. This could be a little bit more of a demonstration of the deck's power.
Yes, it is indeed. The Rune Myth this early I also really like. Not every list is running this because it is quite greedy sometimes if you're running up into aggressive decks, but versus this Priest, my goodness, will you take those discounts happily? And doing what Nazmani is doing for 4 mana and perhaps even doing that twice, given the 2 procs you can get from it. The hand is coming together. So for Fury Hunter, you don't really want to see those bristlebacks this early on, but they could come in clutch to deal with the Nazmani once they go down to 2 mana with the Rune Rod. However, for Jambray, is the juice. He can copy the Nazmani on turn 6, and the train could really get rolling quickly here.
I mean, Jambray is nothing if not a showman. He's teasing us so perfectly. We see all the pieces of the puzzle coming together one by one. Even teasing us with the palm readings. Again, could have played it on 3, could have played it on 4. He's even debating if it's worth playing it here. He kind of wants to wait a full extra turn before he goes with the pop-off, because unless he's going with the pop-off on turn 6, he can just play the palm reading on turn 6 and likely discount an extra card next turn as well, and then go for the pop-off on turn 7. It's all just about when he thinks is too late. It's a big game of chicken, where he wants to have the most powerful pop-off available, but he doesn't want to do it that one turn too late when Fury Hunter starts to hit that critical mass.
I have to tell you, I couldn't identify it for myself. I wanted to go in with the Nazmanis on turn 6, but that's just with the gift of Luminance, and it probably doesn't include the Psyche split unless you are a god with the discounts, right? And it would have involved playing the palm reading one sooner. So
Dieser Bestie sehnt niemand.
not many other people had the bravery to play this, so he's got to pilot it to utmost efficiency, and we are soon approaching that critical mass he talked about, because Fury Hunter is turboing through the deck, has gotten 2 discounts from the Rune Mithril Rod, and he's got this Nightshade Matron to keep cycling through the deck as well.
Oh, he's starting to do stuff. Things are happening now with Fury Hunter. Jambray saying, okay, this is unsung heroes of the deck coming into play. The Draconic Studies, because obviously when you're playing Combo Priest with the Sethix and the Nazmanis, if you don't hit the Sethix, you run out of stuff to discount. You just have you know, you spend 2 or 3 mana on turn 8 or 9. Sink that mana into and convert it into monstrous amounts of tempo. Because again, if we could see any of the big board controls potentially come down, Alex Straza, and if not, even just the more mid-game ones like the Circus Amalgam or the Hothead can provide Jambray a huge board swing.
Over on Fury Hunter's side, though, I love that he's going for the big Shadow Blast on the Thalnos for 2 reasons. Like, he's not really got any good ways of damaging himself outside of the Shadow Blast, because you're just trying to do this as quickly as possible and race Jambray. And the second is, Thalnos in the race stat pool is pretty good, too. Anything that can keep drawing him more cards, even if it's a bit slow. At least it's not an armor vendor here, and he can curate it such that it's Ferdinand and Thalnos right now in the race set pool, I believe. Both of them have his ultimate game ASAP. But here we go. This is a miracle turn.
Here it is. He's going in. I guess you just make the most amount of Nazmanis as soon as you can. As I said, with these Draconic Studies, I think it's just about getting the most mana cheated out as you humanly can on these turns.
Indeed, the Power Word Feast is free.
Ich habe keine Zeit für Spielgeld.
Okay, sorry. He ended up taking Desperate Prayer. I guess because, like, you don't even expect your Nazmanis to die. Yes, Sarah!
Keine Bewegung und niemand wird verletzt.
Okay, looks like he's playing the Plague Proto Drake in chat. That's pretty good. This deck from Fury Hunter, no Soul Rest.
Oh my goodness, look at this. How does Fury even scratch anything? I guess you're taking Holy Smite there just because it's cheap and allows you to play more dragons. Like, Elec Mount is nice, but I just want to cheat out more mana.
Absolutely. Get rid of the armor vendor.
Go.
Wait, the Skeletal's playable as well? All of these discounts.
Ich
frage mich, ob...
Every spell he plays, -3 mana to
Niemand darf überleben.
some time ago. And that means that the Ysera joins the party as well. I was thinking maybe the Bristlebacks could help Hunter. I don't think so anymore there.
Imagine the Bristlebacks making a difference.
More Grimoire though, which is 8 damage AoE.
That's true. That's very true.
There's the Divine Shields, which are kind of problematic, but he has these 1/1 sticking around to ping off some shields. Actually, it's kind of doable.
With the Thalnos as well,
Ich
that's like
frage
infinite
mich,
board
ob...
play, right? That gets up to like
True.
16. He's just doing it.
Grimoire of Sacrifice. Destroy a minion, deal 2 damage to all enemy minions. And of course, that does stack with Moarg and with the spell damage. It's even better.
Niemand darf überleben.
In as well. I can't even believe how much this is. Yeah, I guess it's
Grimoire? That
double
works.
Grimoire? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, goes for the Thalnos instead, which does allow him the breakpoint to deal with the Ysera and the Proto Drake as well, which is a big deal. Right?
Ich bin da, wo die Post abgeht.
That's the push from Jambray. Thankfully for Jambray, he actually generated Ysera as a dragon, so he has more stuff. Like his hand would just be empty right now.
Yeah.
So is this Insta Awakens? Just and then play an Emerald Drake?
Instead, but I think that like tempo quote unquote
Erstaunlich.
5 doesn't feel worth it, so I
Ich zeig euch, wie's gemacht wird. Ich bin da, wo die Post abgeht.
Dark. After all our hype at that amazing turn from Jambray.
Wird das ewig so weitergehen? Wird das ewig so weitergehen?
and I've been sleeping on it.
Schaut mich an!
Forgot it existed before I submitted it.
Ich zeig euch, wie's gemacht wird.
Super strong. And so in the end, yeah, Ysera awakens the Emerald Drake. It's the expected game plan for Jambray, but now, as we see the peak of the head, I think he knows as well as we do, this is looking absolutely miserable.
With a Bristleback, can be played with Backfire, whatever Fury Hunter likes.
Ich bin da, wo die Post abgeht. Ich zeig euch, wie's gemacht wird.
Three of them are exactly. One of them is a dragon, which could be like Alex Straza, but that obviously never gives lethal anyway. And then 2 cards off the top. Oh, good
One
point.
off.
Yeah.
With Nightmare would be one off. Actually, that
Wow.
was. I mean, if you had calculated as one off anyway, then all more power to Fury Hunter, right? Because Fury Hunter is just setting up his own lethal, right? With the Tamsin
Yeah.
hand, which is going to be like fatigue 2 through 7, plus the natural fatigue of drawing the card.
Yep.
And I think that is guaranteed lethal, so. Man, Jambray doing the best he can to try and threaten a 2-turn lethal setup, but I think we can do the math right. Fury Hunter will deal 1 through 7 arithmetic sequence fatigue, which is 28 damage. Is it actually one off?
He can also then just coil it.
Ratzar
Yeah.
gegen Garrosh.
So yeah, it is just.
Ja, ihr Segeljets in meinen Gewässern.
Winner, Fury Hunter,
Lass
once
die
again
Jagd beginnen.
using the on-stream curse. He's cast it well and truly aside as he goes up 2-0 at the start of this Masters Tour. It's a victory, I'm sure, because it does, of course, mean that it's a 1-1 start for Jambray. 2 players who have a great amount of respect for each other and are instrumental to the other's success a lot of the time. there it is. Fury Hunter again showing his read on this metagame is just absolutely iron tight. He understands it so completely, and these combo decks that seem to be infesting the metagame right now, he's just the master of them. I rarely, if ever, can find a misplay with these style of decks from Fury.
I completely agree with the no misplays part from Fury. I'm not sure if this is
Schnappt euch die Säbel, jetzt wird gerasselt!
but just the fact that it can beat meta decks, definitely, what Fury Hunter is bringing. And it also can beat the mad genius type of for our Master champion. Perhaps a back-to-back in his future. We'll see if he can accomplish what only Blythe has done so far. But for Jambray as well, even though we lost in the Swiss, still run it back up. I've got Jambray knows them better than anyone else. I'd love to see him pull something out of the bag later on.
Yeah, agreed. Like I said, couple bad beats for Jambray. In particular, just really not able to get its teeth into these games. We saw what it can do in that last game, and I think he set it up gorgeously to get to that kind of critical mass that we often shooting out just absurd amounts of mana. But seemingly I was wrong with regards to this Warlock deck. I had my mindset in the old Warlock versions that run obviously the Soul Rend and the Unstable Shadow Blasts as the most impressive amount of damage. Like, if they could deal 15 damage to a board, I would be, or to one minion in particular, sorry, I would be stunned with the old version of the deck. But here with this new version, 12 damage AoE to everything seemed incredibly doable. It could have been more with the talent as well, a little bit more mana spare. And so, huge congratulations for Fury to find a very clever version of Warlock. I am sure it will be doing him very, very well as the day progresses. But we're of course all done with our first game of round 2 here at the start of Masters Tour Undercity. And when we come back from this break, we're going to get a look around the tavern to see what the rest of our competitors
Mit Klauen und Klingen!
Gut gekämpft. Ich ergebe mich.
Rexa gegen Jaina.
Ich wollte immer nur studieren.
Lass die Jagd beginnen.
Ich diene der Kamane!
Welcome back to round number 2 of Masters Tour Undercity. My name is Dawn, joined by the wonderful Derek. You just came off of the casting desk with Gia. How was it going through that last series?
A lot of fun. Two of my favorite boys, Fury Hunter and Jamboree, going against it. And while I love all my teams equally and will not choose favorites, I am, of course, sad for Fury Hunter and sad for Jamboree, sorry, and happy for Fury Hunter. But it does look like another really good start for our previous winner, so maybe we could be seeing our second back to over the past couple of weeks. I've seen him grinding away in the practice servers or the practice discords that we have with a lot of the other top players like Fury Hunter and Jamboree, who we've just seen, and he's come away with a very interesting lineup. Obviously that Mozaki mage, which feels like the banned away versus Idaho, so clearly already setting the stage for how powerful that deck could be going into the rest of the tournament. And jumping into game 2 with his Demon Hunter already having won, we can see that I think should be Idaho's strategy. Haven't had the chance to take too good of a look at the deck because just coming off the previous series. But if I had to guess, I would say that for Orange now, his weak spot is potentially that Druid, because left over for Idaho are obviously the Pirate Quest Warrior and a very spicy looking version of Mage, which is neither weapon nor Garrote, of Rogue, sorry.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting too, talking about Druid as well, looking at Idaho's Druid. It's actually a top Druid.
I know I'm going to get Deco!
I feel like a lot of players have brought this. We've been
Ich bin zu viel für euch!
this heavier, slower, Anacondra. It's going to be interesting to actually see how this Taunt Druid performs after all of these changes. But speaking of that Druid, Orange is going to be queuing up that Druid next after getting that win with the Demon Hunter.
Yeah, and like I said, this is where things because thank you for laying out for the help of myself as well as the viewers at home that it is the aggro Taunt Druid for Idaho, which I think we're going to be seeing Druid on Druid here, which is where things could get a little bit rough for Orange. This Druid that he's got typically has been weak to, as I think some of the other casters have been joking about, it's been weak to cards. If your opponent plays stuff in the early game with this Druid, generally you're going to be in a bit of a rough spot. And given that Orange has gone for a fairly greedy build, I want to say, he doesn't have those Druids of the Reef in the early game, which make you a lot of early aggression. Maybe the Marks of the Wild go somewhat to counteract that, because you of course have Sound in that game, which can get you tremendous amounts of in this matchup, I think he's going to be in a premium position for the rest of the series. The story of your weakest deck and whether or not it can get the win. And the weakest deck here, as I see it for Orange, is this Druid.
And we even saw that in the first match. I feel like that Gia and I were casting where it really struggled in those first couple of games. It finally did take a win, but by then...
Alles, was nebelhaft erschien, wird nun kristallklar.
Clawing back in the whole series as a whole, so yeah, this could be a huge pivotal game here for Orange to
Ich komme zu spät, viel zu spät.
I'm really curious to see what it is that Idaho is queuing up into this Druid as well.
Yes, I think if...
Ich habe keine Zeit für
the aggro Druid on the other side, the Taunt Druid, not the Face Hunter, as someone has erroneously named it there, Don't be mistaken. A deck that has gotten a little bit weaker with the most recent balance patch, with Razor Main Battle Guard going down to a 2/2. But quite correctly, no reason to take it out of the deck. It is still very much the beating heart of the deck, because it allows you early game pushes by going for an early Annoyatron, an early Pack Mule, and it of course also allows you those really powerful late game pushes where you go Oracle of Elune, Razor Main Battle Guard, and then double up on either Greybow or Teacher's Pet. And if that bunch of late game nonsense wasn't powerful enough already, Mr. Smite is of course coming in for a bit of an extra push to close out the game, which is an addition that I think makes a lot of sense. It's often a piece of this aggro Druid deck is as soon as it loses board, it loses the game because it has very little reach. But now with Park Panther and Mr. Smite, some of those decks that have power spikes in terms of removal around turn 6 or 7.
Yeah, and I feel like even with the mini set coming out too, things like the addition of Druid of the Reef have been very impactful for this deck. Being able to get out an early taunt that has more health than all the other minions that start the game out. I mean, I've seen games that it's able to get out on the board and it kind of just snowballs the game from there, and sometimes it doesn't even get to that late game that you were talking about with those big swings. We'll see if that's
Dieser Bestie sind niemand.
Starting off with what looks to be some great answers here. The Lunar Eclipse against a fairly aggressive deck looks like a good start.
Yeah, big fan of the Lunar Eclipse here. Moonlight Guidance, or Moonlit Guidance, sorry, is this early game because it's really allowed a amount of flexibility in this Druid deck. Being able to go Moonlight Guidance into double Lightning Blue, double Umbral Owl are really ideally what you're looking to do. Double key cards, namely Overgrowth is the main one you're looking for, but it of course massively lowers the power of the card, because if you're playing it on turn 2, it's really unlikely actually that you're going to be able to get that repeated effect of captive from Orange, but it could pay off in spades.
And for Idaho, tempoing out that Razor Main Battle Guard that you were mentioning earlier, even with that effect, the change to it, putting it at 2 health, still was going to die to that solar or the lunar eclipse, excuse me, that Orange had. I'm kind of interested. There's not really a lot going on in hand, and just drawing even more slow cards. This is not the kind of pressure that Idaho is looking for, but I'm really kind of interested in that choice to just tempo the Battle Guard.
Yeah, Idaho obviously really not happy with this. I can understand why he did go for it, because his hand was not looking good, right? And if he played it and it stuck around for one turn, he can then just very happily go Peasant plus Composting. Drawing 2 cards of Composting is fine in this mid-game. You're rarely going to get much better than that unless you have an incredibly strong starting hand. It did not work out for him. Obviously, as you said, Orange had that Lunar Eclipse. And now for Idaho, I do like that he's taking a step back. I think going to Peasant plus Composting just
Lass die Jagd beginnen.
was a little overly aggressive. It's a little pessimistic even, I would say. And in order to score this one back, I think he needs to trust his deck to give him ways to develop huge amounts of minions onto the board, or even just rely on Arbor up on turns 5 and 6. Like, that's not the worst thing I've ever heard.
The pack be able to
Weidmann's Heil.
something out on the board. Not sure exactly. It almost looked like floated mana there. Oh, okay. All right. So gone a little bit ahead.
It appears that the mule has now not only broken the climb, but is actually able to travel through time.
Mein Fußmädchen, ich will deine Falle.
But here we go for Orange versus Idaho. On this turn here, it does mean that as I think the bottom half of the screen has caught up, but the top screen hasn't. I'm a little bit confused with the time manipulation that's going on here. But either way, as I was saying, I think
survival of the fittest. Clear that board, and now Idaho's right back in that awkward position. Draws right in. That Mr. Smite to take the win there. And
Ich jage allein.
With good old Mr. Smite to close it out there. It's obviously a little bit sad that we didn't get to see those middle turns there for Idaho and for Orange to see how he responded to that beautiful start to the game for Idaho. But it just goes to show the power of this deck, or really the weakness of the deck from Orange. Any kind of board push, even if it's just rubbish minions until turn 5 and then you just play a couple of Arbor ups, sometimes just good enough to get there, and we'll be able to fight slower Mr. Smite even though they both run Mr. Smite very confusingly, but the slower Celestial Alignment version for Orange is just very, very susceptible to
Wollt ihr wissen, warum man mich Koloban nennt?
one with that Druid, and I've got to say Pirate Warrior doesn't sound much better, and is also, I would argue, probably not a great matchup for the Druid.
Yeah, it seems like this Druid definitely is going to be the weak point of the Orange. Watching that replay, even having a board clear answer just was not enough against the pressure. And like I said, I'd imagine we're going to consider that from the other team. But the Weapon Rogue, which has kind of come back into the scene here. We've been seeing people away from that Garrote Rogue after the recent changes. Still a couple of Garrote Rogues, but switching over to this Weapon Rogue to be able to push some insane amounts of damage. With playing this Weapon Rogue.
Yeah, Weapon Rogue is really all reliable in terms of master.
Ich jage allein. Ich bin da, wo die Post
to beat the combo decks before they can do their combo, and also to kind of target control decks, but control is fairly weak at the moment, so that's very much a tertiary aspect of the deck. Because for Spell Mage, Mizaki Mage, Garrote Rogue, the Druids as well, even the OTK Demon Hunters, apologies, this rogue can often just get there a little bit quicker, especially now that you have access to Mr. Smite. That is a really crucial tool, which allows you to ramp up the damage drastically with the extra pirates to buff their attack. Tempo Rogue is, I guess, a good a name as any for him here, with what is a really
Da müsst ihr schon schneller rennen.
Doesn't feel like it necessarily slots into Garrote Rogue or Weapon Rogue especially well. It's still just a brutally powerful card.
Yeah, and even taking advantage of the Scab's Cutter Butter to try to get discounts, cheat things out. There could be very, very huge swing turns with this deck. I mean, we've already seen that with all of the different variations of Rogue. I'm expecting this to follow that same pattern.
Erstaunlich.
It's going to be very interesting. Now, going into this matchup, we see it is going to be Rogue versus Rogue. What do you kind of expect to play out with this matchup? You were talking about the importance against this Tempo Rogue.
That can be a real weird one, because this deck, I would have to guess, because the bottom half of the deck is where you have all the cheap minions, you have the field as well. If you can draw that portion of the deck and play it all out on turn 4 or earlier, you're in a good spot. Probably the Weapon Rogue out of the game, because you will kill them before they will kill you. But if you miss floating even a little bit of mana in the early turns, the Weapon Rogue will more amount of damage, and then to deny that extra push of damage. For Idaho, this kind of hand is pretty much possible, I would say. And to see what is a very strong hand here with Foxy Fraud, Swindle to fill out any card draw questions you may have had with this hand, and even just a couple of 2-1s with the Guardian Org Merchant, so just a lot of pressure.
Yeah, and being able to point it out, just start with this immediately, get something on board. It seems like an insanely fantastic start. Finding the neophyte too already, that just fills in that curve even more.
Ich zeige euch, wie's gemacht wird!
Comfortable just playing the tempo. Octobot?
Der Schuss ging daneben. Erstaunlich!
Yeah, I mean, Octobot is very unlikely to be killed in response by Idaho. That is pretty good.
Euer Wunsch soll mir Anregung! Erstaunlich!
Anyway, it's not like he increases his card draw by more.
I think it makes a little bit of sense too. There's already a follow-up play if the Octobot just gets cleared without triggering the effect, which, like you said, does seem unlikely. But putting the swine tusk into the deadly poison is a great follow-up with the discounts too, and maybe it can start to snowball the game. There's a Raider to follow up as well, but Idaho does seem like there's a good solid hand for him as
Rexa
well. So
gegen
it's going to be really
Nemsi.
interesting. Orange just really
Sollen wir
some
loslegen?
draw to really continue
Lass
filling
die
in
Jagd
the
beginnen.
rest of this kind of curve and the game has already started to formulate.
Interesting, yeah. Idaho just going with dagger and a swing to clear it off. And I've got to say, this is not generally the way that I would advocate playing against weapon rogue, because I like to just go as wide as I can as soon as I can. Because if he'd just gone with bump into the Octobot and then, or I guess, sorry, I should say, you go with one Org Merchant on your own Foxy Fraud and then bump into the Octobot, the other Org Merchant on the 1 health Octobot left over, and then you end up with a 3-1 and 2-2-1s at the end of that turn. That's just a lot more damage. That's something that Orange is going to have to chew through in the coming turns. Whereas now for Idaho, you know, he saved the Orc Merchants to potentially go with field contact. But that's a long way away. Like, turn 5 is the late game in this matchup. That's not the mid game. And so I think I would have advocated for just a slightly more aggressive push here and start to convert some of this card advantage into board control.
Yeah,
Wir haben unseren Fluch in unsere Stärke verwandelt.
Idaho might have been hoping to just save it one more turn and potentially try to draw into an Octobot of his own there, and then go in on that, and really wouldn't be as possible to use that efficiently with having used the Og Merchants already, but that certainly makes the field contact a bit better.
Okay, Swindle, a real nice pickup for Orange to start juicing this hand a little bit more. If he can get himself the Silver Leaf Poison or a, what am I thinking of, Cutting Class, then it feels like his card draw problems should be cleaned up for the rest of this game. And there it is, Cutting Class in hand, a couple of Bloodsail Raiders as well. A lot of damage that he can start pushing now, and it's very much on Idaho to start converting this.
Ich würde es Ihnen zeigen. Ich würde es Ihnen allen zeigen.
Board control to try and close out the game.
And going wide against Rogue in general, typically over Hearthstone's history, at least once like fan of knives and some of those things left standard, going wide, like you mentioned, is just such a fantastic line against another Rogue, whether that's in a mirror match or just whatever game you're playing. If you can go wide, but it's so difficult for that Rogue to deal with. And maybe this line that taken
Diese Bestien sind niemand!
being able to apply that pressure is enough time to potentially find like a back-to-back cloak setup?
I think it's possible. Yeah, he's got a lot of time because right now, I mean, but he does not need to play cloak on this turn because he's not under that much pressure. Even leaving the the field contact alive it's not that bad, right? Again, this is not Garrote Rogue for Idaho, so it's not like if he allows the field contact to survive, he is necessarily going to be dead to a bunch of Garrotes in the coming turns.
Ich frage mich, ob...
will, again, I think kind of struggle to convert that card advantage into a whole bunch of damage.
I'm curious if Idaho is going to be going for trying to take advantage of the scabs. Try to get a big swing time like we're talking about. But I don't know if it's gonna happen.
Orange actually goes with a clear as well, which I was a little surprised to see. I was kind of right there with you, where I thought that just punching face every turn would be able to get him there. But he disagrees, going for the board control route, which lackluster secret passage might leave himself very much behind card draw, because now for Idaho, any concerns I might have had about not applying enough pressure are very much answered, because this push with scabs and a whole bunch of raggedy one-drops are going to be pushing a huge amount of damage.
And they don't look very menacing on their own, but when they start forming that ragtag
Ich frage
little
mich,
one-drops
ob...
all together, it starts to really get scary.
Euer Wunsch sei mir Anregung.
And at this point, maybe holding these Bloodsail Raiders to find a Mr. Smite, but now
We'll have to see. I mean, Orange has now got
Schilde hoch!
still probably another seasonal, of course, fantastic draw. Turns. The Shroud off the top, maybe it can be. And now we are looking at an awful lot of damage, right? This is 6, 12 from the weapon and Mr. Smite, and then I believe another 8 from the 1-mana Bloodsail Raider for just 20 damage next turn.
yeah, finding that Mr. Smite off
Ich
of the
frage
concealment
mich,
feels
ob...
huge. Along with that discount from Orange early on, playing that Tempo Octobot set this up. There's other minions in the deck, but there's actually less minions in this version than, let's say, the deck that Idaho is running. And we're really kind of seeing that discrepancy here as well, where Orange, it almost felt like Orange really got to set up this whole grand scheme of things. And you can see Idaho's reaction there as these pirates come onto the board.
Yeah, giving him a big clap. Pretty upset about that one, actually. It looks like from Idaho, and you can understand why. For me, my bugbears partner, I fully understand where he's coming from. It feels like there's nothing you can do here at the receiving end of it. They just swing the weather with a weapon. But I think overall it was well played by Orange. Whether or not he should have killed the contact is something I'm not 100% sure on, but I will definitely defer to Orange on that one, that he will more often make a better call than I will. And again, the only thing from Idaho, I would argue, on the other hand, boil it all down. Whether or not it was worth it to actually coin out because it all led to these couple turns where he went coin Fox Fraud into Dagger, which is just a very slow few turns, and maybe with a slightly different deviation of his resources, he could have got lethal one crucial turn earlier.
Yeah, or maybe even just having more of an aggressive follow-up
Ich
to
frage
that,
mich, ob...
coin play that you talked about, just going in on it, kind of committing to that line if he was going to take that, because yeah, the follow-up of just a dagger felt a little bit questionable and kind of almost seemed like opposites of what he was going for initially. So that could have been a detriment for him in that game, but that does mean that Orange is up 2-1 now in the series and just has to get a win with that Druid. Is it going to happen?
That's right. It's just the weak link left. It's so often how it works with Conquest. It's a mistress indeed, because you feel like you're ahead. And
Ich bin da, wo die Post abgeht!
But I would argue that they're not great matchups. They might not be terrible, but they're not fantastic. As Idaho
Frisch aus dem Ofen.
But it's almost certainly going to be. He can do anything similar to that in this game.
Yeah, I don't even know. There's not a lot of removal options for Orange. There are the couple of lunar eclipses, maybe finding the owls, which, you know, potentially the Samuro that we saw that did come out and attempt to slow down the... from Idaho. Yeah, I don't know where Orange is going to find the resources to keep up with it.
Unterdrückt ihre Magie!
Yeah, there's a couple different ways that you can go about it with this deck, because there's the alignment half and the non-alignment half of the deck. And the lines get very blurred after you've played it. But I will say that just going for an all-out turn 3 or 4 Celestial alignment can very much win you the game. Rogue tops out at like 4 mana. So if they're playing a 4 mana card as the only play on their turn, you're going to be able to easily outpace that as Druid after alignment. And we do see Orange, even if he wasn't necessarily hard digging for the alignment, did take a pretty aggressive mulligan, throwing away the Owl and the Lightning Bloom. And so he's clearly doing something a little bit more ambitious than what he could have got with just an early Owl. And to be fair, he's got a pretty good hand, going Jerry-Rig into Overgrowth, into hopefully some nonsense with the Anaconda. Is pretty strong.
Into that Overgrowth, like you talked about, it's so good to set up, and if Idaho can't find a draw, feels like he might just be a sitting duck.
Beeindruckend. Dieses Mal gewinnt ihr.
Is just so I mean, it's the difference between winning and losing. It's pretty simple. This game plan has gone from looking gorgeous for Orange to just looking like a whole load of rubbish.
Well, does Idaho want to just redo that? Is there a line where just Shadow Step that Neophyte, replay it, and go?
I think so. If we remember what his deck actually is, like, we can define it as Tempo Rogue, but it's an aggressive board-based rogue with a fair bit of burst damage. We have to remember, Wicked Stat does a lot of damage once you hit that, and it gets up to rank 2 once turn 5 rolls around. And so just pushing damage while he can, taking his chip damage where he can get it. If Orange wants to play Overgrowth alone this turn, he can be either.
Das Licht wird den Sieg
bringen.
Lass die Jagd beginnen.
Already facing down 9 damage on the board, sitting at 13 is not a comfortable position for Orange to be in at all. That Neophyte, especially back-to-back Neophytes, really slowed this game plan down for Orange. It was looking really good. I was with you, that line, but now that Neophyte just completely stopped that whole play in its tracks. That's a Mr. Snipe. That's a card.
Both of those statements were Alright, what can Orange pull out of his hat now to save himself from this one? Because while Mr. Smite currently represents guaranteed lethal, these marks of nature might be able to be the, or Mark of the Wild, sorry, not Mark of Nature, for Orange, might be the difference maker that can allow him to taunt up, erect the walls, and hide behind them.
That might have to be the line that Orange goes for.
Grüße.
Grüße.
Oh, I don't envy that position that he's in there. Just such an awkward, uncomfortable position. He just has to go for it and hope it's good enough.
Yes, so I'm trying to think exactly how do you do this, because I feel like Anaconda plus marks are pretty crucial to this turn. I'm just wondering if you go
Ich frage
coin,
mich,
movement,
ob...
and hope for owls, because I'm trying to think how cheap the owls would be. I don't think they'd be quite at 0 unless you go for the bloom as well, which is obviously very tempting. But in the end, he just goes owl, which keeps him 1 health out of range of a wicked stab off the top.
Spürt die Kraft der Sonne.
It's a little less likely that the second one would be there available to give Idaho that lethal, but it's still a possibility. And if Orange is already going for the I'm going to do what I can and hope I'm not dead, that hero power fits in perfectly with that.
Idaho finally getting some use out of these brain freezes that have just been clogging up his hand for the entire game. And to be fair to him, he's got himself in the exact same situation as last turn. Mr. Smite will end the game unless Orange can pull a miracle out of his bag.
I feel like last turn was even one of those turns where it seemed Orange was really grasping to just stay alive. Is there anything he can find now at that point, now that that Anaconda and both of the Mark of the Wilds are gone?
Yeah, there was scenario. That was pretty much the last chance for Orange here to be able to turn it around. Best in Shell is a one-off in his deck, I believe, which maybe would have been enough and he would have then, of course, drawn another one from his deck after he played this one, which for a 2-turn Best in Shell into Best in Shell, maybe that would have been enough to be able to fight back against Mr. Smite. But with neither of those two options being found, his only chance is to say, okay, the card in hand is not Mr. Smite, and it's not... sorry, it's not Wicked Stab. He actually knows that it's not Wicked Stab, or he would be dead on this turn. But he just needs to pray that it's not Mr. Smite, and then maybe he can turn it around next turn. As we can see, though, Idaho, after such a scrappy game, so nearly just running dry and completely dead on resources, takes us to Game 5.
I feel like exactly what you were talking about. We're really seeing this Druid struggle here. And now it has come down to this game number 5. So it's going to be the Druid versus the Warrior. Now, Idaho, in the same vein, that aggressive, really damage-oriented Warrior. And if it goes anything like that last game, it's going to be quite a struggle for Orange.
It is indeed. Taking a closer look at the Warrior deck for Idaho, so we get a rundown of the beating he put on Orange in this game. It is a relatively aggressive one, because we've seen the builds change quite drastically as the meta has developed. We've seen Barrow go in and out, we've seen Rancor go in and out. Now Idaho has gone with 2 Man the Cannons as the kind of removal card that he's gone for in the list, which it feels like most lists are going for, given that you can only run so many pirates in the deck. And he's also got 1 Provoke. Those are kind of going to be the dead cards, as I would see it in the matchup, where you just want as many stats as you can play on every turn as possible. But for the most part, I would say it's just a very well-suited deck for the matchup, where it's just pirate after pirate after pirate, which is the last thing that Druid wants to see. They're high health, high attack minions, very efficiently statted for the mana cost, and a lot of them have to be removed the turn you play them, like Defias Cannoneer or the South Sea Captain, lest you take a huge amount of damage.
That, in combination with weapon swings, completing the second portion of the quest, I mean, those are massive amounts of damage. That's essentially Hunter hero power damage without really having to do much at all. And it's definitely something I feel like we kind of tested this a lot in our preparation before the Masters Tour, where even up against this Druid, a lot of those cannon hits were just going big because there wasn't anything coming out from the Druid to get in the way to try to slow down those cannon hits. So that was just extra damage that was going just playing
it's really tough for the Druid to keep up. I will say, in terms of a realistic strategy that Orange can go for.
Gut gespielt.
Warriors. Biggest card by far is Smite, or Rakara, if the quest has been completed. And so if you can play the Celestial Alignment before they find Rakara, or generate Rakara, I should say, that can be a very realistic win condition. And so Orange here going for a keep on the Lady Anaconda is not necessarily the same plan, I was saying, with the alignment, but it kind of feeds into a similar strategy where it's a great card if you find the alignment, and even if you don't, it sets up for a really powerful pop-off turn with all the nature spell discounting.
Yeah, it's really interesting as well to see this version, these versions we're starting to see now after all of this testing and these players submitting their decks, these heavier Druid decks, they still run this Anaconda, but they're not going in on Anaconda like, you know, it's not Anaconda full power, get a huge board with like 4 Anacondas and play a bunch of zero cost things. It's just the one Anaconda, but often, like you said, that just discounting by 2 is enough to get other things going in the deck to draw towards other plans that Orange might have. This Owl in hand maybe could do something, but I don't know if it's going to be enough. There's a Lunar Eclipse. There's some answers. It just depends on how fast Idaho can start to get these pirates out.
Exactly right. Idaho, apologies, here going with double pirate right now as opposed to South Sea Captain and then other pirates next turn. It means that he loses out on the battle cry of the Fogsail Freebooter because he could have got the weapon and then played the Fogsail Freebooter next turn. But it gets more pirates online so that his captain buffs more cards immediately when it comes down, which is, I think, a very worthwhile trade-off. So I like this sequencing from Idaho.
Yeah, absolutely. Giving the trade-off of the damage now for additional damage later.
Right.
That Lunar Eclipse coming out. It's not going to be able to take out the captain because it's coming out now, but it does slow down a little bit of that damage at least. And Orange able to also pull off some ramps, so maybe we're going to be able to work towards playing more things here in just a moment, but going to need even more spells to continue discounting that Owl further.
That's right, and this is the other benefit of Idaho's play, is he gets the captain down post Lunar Eclipse, right? Orange has now already expended his key removal piece, as unfortunately it looks like we're having another slight spectator issue with Orange's hand, which hopefully, there we go, will get sorted as soon as possible. I don't think this was a skip ahead either, because he was at 6 mana already on this turn. In terms of the options we're looking at here, Guardian Animals can obviously pull Owls, but I'm not especially interested in that. There's only one left in the deck. And so probably, yeah, the Power of the Wild does make just a little more sense.
It's just another cheap spell to try to work towards getting that Owl out on this turn. It's not really doing a whole lot on its own, but pairing it with that Owl to be able to get the Owl out and remove damage off the board. A decent amount of damage, I would say, getting to remove that captain off the board.
Oh, Idaho in an absolute state as he top decks Shiver their Timbers, one of the only cards in his deck that just leaves him with absolutely nothing to do. I mean, he can clear this Panther, but that really is not what you're looking to do in this situation at all. He really, really, really wanted a pirate here to get those cannons fired. And that's exactly what he didn't get. So now Orange gets a full turn of just nothing happening from Idaho, which is how he can turn this one around.
Picks up the Samuro, but it's not going to be buffed, and there's no more spells to put in combination with it to clear this board. Is it just maybe a Cenarian Ward to hope that there's enough armor and maybe a taunt minion to stem this damage coming through?
How much health is that? He would go up to 16. Idaho is currently representing 6, 7, 8. So I think he's... If Idaho has Smite in hand, he's representing lethal through the Cenarian Ward, right? Because his smite would have been buffed up multiple times by the Whetstone Hatchet in hand. Which means that if Orange wants to play around Smite, which is a very good read based on Idaho's hand, he cannot go for that line of just playing the Cenarian Ward. He needs to go for Malagos and hope to hit Bloom plus Mark of the Wild, which are literally the last two cards he draws off of the Malagos. If it hadn't been exactly those two to round it out, he was making a play that just left him dead. Little did he know if he just played the Cenarian Ward, he would have won that game anyway. But for Orange, what a play to make based on the information he had available. It was such a risk, but a risk that just paid off unbelievably well for him here. As now, what can Idaho do? Look at the size of this Mally.
And even previously used that 5 damage Shiver Their Timbers to clear off that 3-2. Can't even put that 5 damage towards trying to get through this Malagos here. But like you said, incredible draws from Orange. And on top of that, also finding that second solar to be able to also clear something at the same time as getting this gigantic Malagos out on the board. All right. I see a guidance that can help find even more stuff. I kind of like that.
Definitely don't mind that. I see that. I see a lot of turtles, which also I think would be able to get you the win. Best in shell into best of shell feels like a very, very strong game plan. I guess Orange is maybe starting to get a little afraid of his health total, because if the next card is Cannoneer, then theoretically he could leave himself vulnerable to 4 cannons all face, which is very unlikely, I know, but it's a possibility, and he needs to value how far ahead he thinks he is now in this game.